Today I'm going to show you how to crochet the corner to corner granny rectangle. In this video I'll be showing you how to increase, how to maintain the rectangular shape, and how to decrease. Then, as an optional extra at the end, I'm going to show you how you can prep for whatever border you fancy putting onto your finished blanket. To begin, pop a slip knot onto your hook. Then chain 4. Then slip stitch to that very first chain you made to form a little ring. Chain 4. And work 3 double crochet stitches into this little central ring. This is your granny cluster. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Then to end, we're going to end with an extended double crochet stitch. This is what keeps it nice and square and straight edged without any flaring. So you're going to yarn over, go into that central ring and draw up a loop, just as you normally do when you're doing a standard double crochet. Then yarn over and pull through just 1 loop. You'll still have 3 loops on your hook. Now you can work off your double crochet as normal. So yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. Chain 4 and turn. Now as we are increasing, we need to increase the number of granny clusters by an extra 1 per row. So for increased rows, after you have chained 4 and turned, in between these last 2 stitches of the row below, we're going to work a granny cluster. And a granny cluster is 3 double crochet stitches. Then, in between the last 2 stitches, over on this other side, here's your chain 4 from the row below, into this space here, work a granny cluster for 3 double crochet stitches. 1, 2, and 3. Now to end, we're going to end with an extended double crochet stitch. So that's yarn over, go into the space and draw up a loop, yarn over, pull through 1, then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So you've increased the amount of granny clusters by 1. So we've gone from 1, now we have 2. Chain 4 and turn. Work a granny cluster in between the last 2 stitches of the row because we are increasing. Then work a granny cluster in between your granny clusters from the row below. To this space right in between them, work a granny cluster, which is just your 3 double crochet stitches. And then in this very end space in between the last 2 stitches, we're going to work a granny cluster, which is your 3 double crochet stitches. And then end with your extended double crochet stitch. So you can see we're still increasing. And we're going to keep increasing until the project is as wide as you want it to be. So your increase rows are chain 4, turn, work a granny cluster in between these 2 stitches from the row below, then in between your sets of granny clusters from the row below, pop 1 more granny cluster. So in between the sets of granny clusters, work a new granny cluster. Then, once you've run out of granny clusters to work in between, you'll be left with this end space, and in there, work a granny cluster, and then end with an extended double crochet stitch. So you'll continue increasing, just repeat the row we just did for as wide as you want your project to be. So we're going for the width first. I'm going to do 1 more increase row. And I'm going to stop increasing at this point because now my project is the width that I want it to be. So if you were making a blanket and you wanted a rectangular blanket, you would continue increasing back and forth until your project was the width that you wanted it to be. Now you have the width you want, we are going to start making it rectangular. And what we need to be working on now we have the width, is now we need the length of the blanket. So to work the rectangular shape on this corner to corner granny, what we want to do is we want to maintain straight sides going upwards. And how you do that is you decrease on one side, but increase on the other. That way, you maintain the same number of clusters all the way up until you have reached the length that you want. Now for me, my blanket, my tiny doll-sized blanket here, is 5 clusters wide. It's therefore 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clusters across. So I want to maintain those 5 clusters as we go up. So we will decrease on one side, and to decrease, we're going to chain 3. Then turn and skip this end space entirely. So you're going to skip the next 4 stitches, your extended double crochet and your granny cluster. Skip all of those and into the next space in between your sets of clusters, work a granny cluster. So you have skipped this whole section entirely. Now before you go much further, grab a stitch marker and you want to pop it into that little space you just created in between your chain 3 and your granny cluster. This way you will always know that this side is the decreased side And this side without the stitch marker is the increase side. Now continue working across these middle sections, work your granny clusters. And as you can see, because I decreased on one side, I've only worked 1, 2, 3, 4 clusters. Now I need to maintain the same amount of clusters per row. So where we started with a decrease, we're going to end with an increase. And the increase is what you've been doing to build up the width. And that's ending in this end space with 3 double crochets, and your extended double crochet stitch. This way we still have 5 clusters, which mirrors the row below, which was your width. So we're going to keep building in a straight line like this. Now we've ended on an increase row and we have no stitch marker on this side of our work. So we start with an increase row. This side of the work will always be an increase. This side of your work will always be a decrease. So we ended on an increase, so we're going to start on an increase. So that is chain 4, turn, and work your granny cluster in between these 2 stitches at the end. Now work your granny clusters in between the sets of granny clusters from the row below. When you've run out of granny clusters to work in between, you'll be back over to this chain 3 space on the decrease side. Now into this space on the decrease side, you're just going to work 1 stitch, and that is the extended double crochet. So just work your extended double crochet stitch into that chain 3 space from the row below. So you can see you're maintaining the same number of clusters, and we're now forming sides going up. Now again, this is our stitch marker side, so we know it is the decrease side. So we simply do what we did in this first row of the rectangular section. So we're going to chain 3. We're going to turn our work, and you're going to skip the first 4 stitches. So skip this extended double crochet and this granny cluster. So ignoring the side space, basically, ignore that because we're on a decrease side, and jump straight into working your granny clusters in between the sets of granny clusters from the row below. So leap straight over in between the granny clusters. Then when you've made it over to the other side, this is our increase side. There's no stitch marker. It's the increasing side. So we end with an increase into this end chain space with a granny cluster of 3 double crochet stitches and an extended double crochet stitch. So you can see we're starting to create this length. So you would keep going. You already built the width of your blanket. Keep going until you have the length. On the increase side, you start and or end with an increase. On the decrease side, where your stitch marker is, you will end or start with the decrease. I'll do a couple more rows and then I will show you how we finish it off once you've achieved the length that you want. So my project is now the length I want it to be. If I turn it this way, so you can see, first of all, we work the width and then you maintain with the decreasing on one side and the increasing on the opposite side. You maintain the width to get the length. So now your project is the length you want it to be. Now we need to bring this corner back to square it off at this side. I'll show you how you do this very first decreasing row if you ended on an increase side, and then I'll take it back and I will show you how you do the first decrease row if you ended on a decrease side. You can use the chapters to jump between the two. So if you have ended on an increase side for your rectangle, we're now going to start the decrease sections. And what you would do is chain 3, just as you have on this decrease side. We're going to turn and you're going to ignore all these first 4 stitches. So your extended double crochet and your granny cluster, ignore those and work a granny cluster immediately in between your sets of granny clusters. So ignore this end space. We are no longer increasing. So leap straight in with your granny cluster on that side. So now we will be decreasing on both sides. So you've leapt straight over and we're going to work granny clusters in between your sets of granny clusters from the row below. And once you have run out of granny clusters to work in between, you'll be over to your decrease side, and just as you have been doing into this end space, work 1 extended double crochet stitch. This is what I would do if I had ended on the decrease side of your work rather than ending on the increase side. So if you have ended on the decrease side, chain 3, because the decrease side is now always going to be the decrease side and we are only going to have decreasing from this point on. And just as you have been doing up this decrease side, skip these first 4 stitches and this outside edge and work granny clusters in between the granny clusters from the row below. Now we're decreasing, so we're going to be dropping by 1 granny cluster per decrease row. So as I've been working with 5 continuously to build the length, I'm now going to be decreasing down to 4 granny clusters. So I'm just going to keep working in between my sets of 2 from the row below, sets of 2 granny clusters. Very noisy stitch marker, sorry, scuffling around. Then once you have run out of space in between granny clusters, you'll be over here on what was your increased side. Now we're going to turn this increased side into a decreased side as well. So into this very end space, work 1 extended double crochet only. So now we are down to just 4 granny clusters where we had 5 for the length. And to decrease the rest of this, we're going to chain 3, turn, ignore this very first space and these first 4 stitches, and work your granny clusters in between the sets of 2 granny clusters from the row below. I know I had 4 granny clusters worked on the last row, so this row I know I'll only have 3. Once you're over to the other side, your original decreasing side, end with 1 extended double crochet stitch only. So you're going to repeat this row back and forth until you have worked your way down to just 1 granny cluster. Skip the first 4 stitches in this corner space, side space, and work your granny clusters in between the granny clusters from the row below. And then end with an extended double crochet stitch to that very last one. Now once you reach the stage where you have got all the way down to just 1 granny cluster remaining, we're not going to end there. We want it to mirror this start point, and this is looking a bit flat. So your very final step will be to chain 1, turn your work, and work a double crochet into this end space. That way you have formed a point to mirror this point. Then chain 1, cut your yarn, leaving a length to weave in afterwards. Pull it up, pull it tight, and your little rectangle is complete. So you have worked your increasing, then you have maintained the same width for the length, then you have decreased. Now, if you'd like to pop a border onto this blanket, I like to have a very, very simple border just to start, which will then set you up for any additional border you want to put on. And how I do that is grab a contrasting colour of yarn and attach it into this space that you just created, right at the very end here. Now you can attach your yarn however you like to attach your yarns. I personally like to have a slip knot on my hook and then draw that loop to the front. It's really not important. You do it however you fancy doing it. And I then chain 2, which counts as my very first double crochet stitch. Now, as this is a corner, I'm going to work 1 more double crochet in there. Slide them around, chain 2, and work 2 more double crochet stitches into that same space. So I've just formed a corner on my corner section. Then I work down the sides in these side spaces 2 double crochet stitches, just 2. I found that for my personal tension, that if I have 3, then it tends to put 1 too many stitches in and I get a ripply, wavy effect. I personally found that 2 double crochet stitches into each side space keeps it nice and flat for me. If you have different tension to me, which is very possible, or you're using different yarn and you find that 3 works for you, then that's absolutely fine. Go ahead, pop in 3. Whatever it is that you put in as this base round, just make sure that you're applying that evenly all the way around. Also, if you like to join as you go with a chain 1 in between these side spaces, that's also fine. You can adapt this to however you want, really. I'm just showing you a very, very basic way of cleaning up these edges in preparation for a border. So I work this all the way down the side, my 2 double crochet stitches. And then when I reach over here, this was the width. So this was the very last increase row I did before taking it rectangular. Into this corner here, in between these 2 stitches, your extended double crochet stitch and your granny cluster, I'm going to work into the space in between, and I'm going to mirror what I did for my corner over here, and that is 2 double crochet, chain 2, and 2 more double crochets back into that same space worked around the stitch. So I have turned the corner, and I'm going to repeat this all the way around. In my side sections, 2 double crochet stitches, and then in the corner sections, so this is my very start with that little ring we made, I work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet. Now this yarn I'm using to demonstrate this really quickly is slightly thinner than the yarn I made the rectangle with. So it is curving in on itself slightly. And if this was the yarn I was going to use for my border, if you've got that, you might want to look at chaining 3 instead of 2. However, if I was using the same weight yarn as I made this central bit with, I wouldn't have that problem. It serves me right for just grabbing whatever yarn was closest to my table for filming. So you would continue this all the way around, 2 double crochet stitches in these side spaces, and then in the corner over here, just like we did on this side, once you hit this top section, this bit before you started decreasing, you work your next corner into this section up here. So you can see on my finished blanket, I did this setup row just as we've done here. And then all I did was go on to do a couple of rounds of double crochet stitches and a round of single crochet just to finish. I personally like a nice plain border on my blankets. I'm not one for fussy elaborate borders, but you can see it just sets it off quite nicely and really highlights the diagonal nature of your blanket. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it has now given you a good understanding of how you increase, how you maintain that rectangular shape, and then how you decrease it at the very end. If you found it helpful, it would be great if you could give me a big thumbs up on the video. And until next time, happy crocheting!